Captain Alex Turner stood at the command center of Aegis 7, watching the stars through the massive viewing port that dominated the space station's bridge. 200 years had passed since humanity last ventured beyond their solar system, and Alex often wondered what lay beyond those distant lights. The orbital defense platform floated silently above Earth, one of 12 massive stations that formed an invisible shield around human space. Each station bristled with weapons that most of the crew had never seen fired in anger. Maintained by engineers who learned their trade from manuals written by people long dead, the morning shift began like any other, with Lieutenant Grace Adams running her standard sensor sweeps of the outer system. She had performed this same routine for 3 years, scanning for threats that never came, monitoring space lanes that remained empty except for the occasional mining vessel or research probe. The deep space sensors reached far beyond Pluto, their quantum arrays capable of detecting gravitational anomalies across dozens of light years. Grace had never seen anything more exciting than a rogue asteroid or the occasional comet diving toward the inner planets. Down on Earth, Dr. Maria Santos descended into the underground archives beneath Geneva, where humanity stored the remnants of their brief but violent expansion into galactic society. The archives stretched for kilometers in every direction, filled with alien artifacts, captured technologies, and detailed records of the wars that had driven humanity into isolation. Maria specialized in archaeology, studying the ruins of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humans learned to build starships. Her favorite subject was the Shadan Empire, a mysterious civilization that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years before vanishing without explanation. Professor Carl Johnson worked alongside Maria in the deep archives, his expertise focused on energy signatures and quantum mechanics. Carl had spent 30 years analyzing the strange readings left behind by the Shadan Empire, trying to understand how an entire galactic civilization could simply disappear overnight. The energy patterns were unlike anything in human science, suggesting technologies that bent the fundamental laws of physics. Carl often joked that the Shadan had probably found a way to hide in plain sight, but his jokes carried an undertone of genuine concern that Maria had learned to recognize. On Mars, Colonel Beth Williams supervised the training exercises of the Solar Defense Corps, watching young recruits learn combat techniques that most politicians considered obsolete. The Red Planet housed humanity's primary military academy, where soldiers trained for wars that the government insisted would never come. Beth had been born during the isolation period and had never seen real combat, but she maintained the old disciplines with religious devotion. Her instructors were veterans of the HFY Wars, grizzled men and women who remembered what it meant to fight for humanity's survival. General Ryan Clark commanded the secret shipyards hidden throughout the asteroid belt where automated factories continued building warships according to designs that predated the Terran Isolation Accords. The general rarely spoke about his work, even to fellow military officers, but his shipyards had been producing vessels for 2 centuries. Most Earth officials believed the asteroid belt contained only mining operations and research stations, unaware that humanity had been quietly preparing for war even while officially pursuing peace. The Terran Isolation Accords of 2387 had been signed after the devastating HFY Wars, when human military tactics had proven too brutal for the galactic community to accept. Humanity had developed a reputation for total warfare, willing to sacrifice entire fleets to achieve victory, using strategies that other species considered barbaric. The Galactic Council had made it clear that humans were no longer welcome in civilized space, and Earth had withdrawn willingly, claiming to embrace pacifism and isolation. Ambassador Julia Roberts maintained Earth's minimal contact with the outside galaxy from her office in the Luna City diplomatic quarter. She received regular updates from the Galactic Council, mostly routine trade notifications and scientific discoveries that were shared freely among member species. Julia had served as humanity's primary diplomat for 15 years, managing the delicate balance between isolation and complete abandonment of galactic affairs. She often received requests for human involvement in various conflicts, requests that Earth's government routinely declined with polite but firm refusals. The peaceful routine that had defined human space for generations began to crack on a Tuesday morning when Grace Adams detected something impossible on her long-range sensors. The gravitational anomalies appeared at the edge of the Oort cloud, massive distortions in space-time that suggested the presence of objects larger than anything in human records. The sensor readings made no sense according to known physics, showing energy signatures that bent light around themselves and created pockets of twisted space. Grace immediately contacted Captain Turner, who rushed to the sensor station to examine the readings personally. The anomalies were moving slowly but deliberately toward the inner system, following trajectories that suggested intelligence rather than natural phenomena. Alex had never seen anything like the energy patterns, but something about them triggered a deep sense of unease that he couldn't explain. He ordered all 12 defense stations to begin tracking the anomalies and sent urgent communications to Earth Command. Down in the Geneva archives, Maria Santos received an emergency call from Captain Turner, asking her to examine the sensor data from Aegis 7. When she saw the gravitational signatures, her blood turned cold with recognition. The energy patterns matched exactly with the ancient Shadan records she had been studying for years. Professor Johnson confirmed her fears after running the data through his quantum analysis programs, finding perfect correlations with the readings they had cataloged from 300-year-old battlefields. The implications hit both scientists like a physical blow. The Shadan Empire hadn't vanished from the galaxy as everyone believed. They had been hiding, waiting, perhaps preparing for something that required centuries of planning. Maria immediately contacted Earth Command, sharing her findings with military officials who had dismissed the Shadan as ancient history. The energy signatures suggested a fleet of enormous size, moving with purpose toward human space. Ambassador Roberts received her first communication from the Galactic Council in over 50 years, transmitted on emergency frequencies that hadn't been used since the Kethter Wars. The message was brief and desperate, coming from species that had spent centuries viewing humanity as dangerous outcasts. The words were simple but carried the weight of galactic desperation. The Shadan had returned to civilized space, appearing simultaneously in dozens of star systems, attacking with technologies that no known civilization could resist. The galaxy that had exiled humanity now begged for their return, admitting that the brutal human war machine might be the only force capable of standing against an enemy that had spent 3 centuries preparing for conquest. Earth faced a choice that would define the future of human civilization, forced to decide whether to remain in isolation or return to a galaxy that needed them desperately but had never truly accepted them. The long peace was ending, and humanity would soon discover whether 2 centuries of isolation had made them stronger or had simply delayed an inevitable reckoning with enemies who had never forgotten the threat that humans represented to their ordered universe. The UES Horizon broke through the quantum barrier at the edge of human space, becoming the first Earth vessel to travel beyond the solar system in 3 centuries. Captain Kevin Wright stood on the bridge of the massive exploration ship, watching stars that no human had seen up close since the isolation accords were signed. The ship carried a crew of 200 specialists, including Major Lisa Campbell, who commanded the military contingent, and Chief Engineer Danny Martinez, who maintained the experimental faster-than-light drive systems that had been developed in secret during the isolation years. Their destination was Nexus Prime, the former headquarters of the Galactic Council, located 47 light-years from Earth. The journey took 6 days, using humanity's improved quantum drive technology, systems that had evolved far beyond anything the galaxy remembered from human ships. Captain Wright had read the old reports about human vessels being crude and primitive compared to alien technology, but the Horizon represented 2 centuries of advancement that had occurred while the rest of the galaxy assumed humans were stagnating. In isolation, Dr. Janet Taylor worked frantically in the ship's science laboratories, analyzing the long-range sensor data that continued streaming in from the target system. The readings showed massive energy signatures around Nexus Prime, patterns that matched the ancient Shadan records but amplified beyond anything in the historical databases. Whatever had returned to galactic space was far more powerful than the empire that had terrorized civilizations 300 years ago. The quantum signatures suggested technologies that had evolved and improved during the centuries of apparent absence. When the horizon dropped out of quantum space near Nexus Prime, the crew faced a sight that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The once beautiful garden world had been transformed into a nightmarish industrial complex, its surface covered with massive energy collectors that fed power to structures floating in orbit. The elegant spires of the Galactic Council had been replaced by twisted metal formations that hurt to look at directly, their geometry somehow wrong in ways that made human minds recoil instinctively. Major Campbell led the first landing party to the planet's surface, accompanied by 12 Marines who had trained for combat scenarios that everyone hoped would never occur. The ruins of the council chambers were filled with evidence of desperate last stands, alien bodies preserved by the same energy fields that had corrupted the planet's atmosphere. The Shadan had not simply conquered Nexus Prime, they had transformed it into something alien and hostile to all organic life. The landing party discovered survivors, hiding in the deep underground bunkers beneath the council complex. Ambassador Zethkara of the Trilaxian Republic emerged from the shadows like a living skeleton, her once proud species reduced to scavenging for survival in the ruins of their greatest achievement. She spoke in broken standard, the galactic trade, language that humans had learned during their brief period of expansion, telling stories that chilled the blood of hardened Marines. The Shadan had returned 6 months ago, appearing simultaneously in dozens of star systems across the galaxy. Their ships were larger and more advanced than anything in the historical records, crewed by beings that seemed to be hybrids of the original energy-based Shadan and conquered alien species. They moved with perfect coordination, striking key targets with surgical precision, overwhelming defenses that had protected civilizations for centuries. Dr. Taylor's analysis of captured Shadan technology revealed the horrifying truth about humanity's isolation period. Embedded deep within the alien quantum matrices were detailed files on human military doctrine, psychological profiles of Earth's leadership, and tactical analyses of every major battle humans had fought during the Kefter Wars. The Shadan had been watching human space throughout the entire isolation period, studying and preparing for an inevitable confrontation. Captain Matthew Lee commanded the defense of Nexus Prime's evacuation, coordinating with alien survivors who had never worked alongside humans before. His tactical approaches confused the aliens initially, as human military doctrine emphasized flexibility and improvisation over the rigid battle plans favored by most galactic civilizations. The evacuation succeeded partly because the Shadan forces couldn't predict human responses. Having prepared for alien thinking patterns rather than human unpredictability, the interrogation of a captured Shadan commander provided the final pieces of a terrifying puzzle. The creature spoke through a translator device, its hybrid form combining energy patterns with biological components taken from dozens of conquered species. It revealed that the Shadan Empire had not fled the Galaxy 3 centuries ago as historians believed. They had retreated specifically because of humanity, recognizing that human warfare represented a threat to their fundamental nature. The Shadan were beings of perfect order and logical progression, creatures who conquered through superior planning and technological advantage. Human tactics during the Kefter Wars had been chaotic and unpredictable, willing to accept massive casualties to achieve objectives that made no logical sense. Humans fought with emotions rather than pure logic, using strategies that even their own commanders couldn't fully explain. This chaos had disrupted Shadan battle plans and threatened their entire worldview. The Empire had spent 3 centuries developing countermeasures against human unpredictability, studying every aspect of human civilization through hidden observation posts and infiltrated agents. They had engineered humanity's isolation not through direct force but through careful manipulation of galactic politics, convincing other species that humans were too dangerous for civilized society. The Isolation Accords had been a Shadan victory, Disguised as human choice, Admiral Patricia Stone's voice crackled through the quantum communicator from Earth, reporting detection of Shadan's scout fleets already operating within the solar system. Long-range sensors had identified cloaked vessels conducting reconnaissance of human worlds, gathering final intelligence before the main assault began. The enemy had positioned themselves for a coordinated strike that would eliminate humanity. Before they could respond effectively, Captain Wright realized the terrifying scope of the Shadan plan as he studied the intelligence gathered from Nexus Prime. The enemy had spent 300 years perfecting their understanding of human psychology and military capabilities. They had returned to galactic space with hybrid technologies that combined their own quantum mastery with improvements stolen from conquered civilizations. Most importantly, they had developed artificial intelligence systems designed specifically to counter human tactical unpredictability. The war had never truly ended. Wright understood as the horizon prepared for its desperate journey back to Earth. Humanity's isolation had been an illusion, created by an enemy that needed time to prepare for a total victory. The Shadan had not forgotten the threat that humans represented to their ordered universe. They had simply been patient enough to ensure that when they returned, they would be ready to eliminate that threat permanently. The galaxy that had once feared human brutality now faced an enemy that had learned to surpass it, and Earth had perhaps weeks before discovering whether 2 centuries of hidden preparation would be enough to survive an assault designed specifically to destroy everything that made humanity dangerous to the forces of absolute order. Colonel Beth Williams activated emergency protocols that had remained dormant for 2 centuries, sending coded signals throughout the solar system that awakened sleeping giants. The asteroid belt responded to her commands with a symphony of mechanical activity as thousands of automated factories came online simultaneously. Hidden shipyards that had been disguised as mining operations began revealing their true purpose, exposing construction bays large enough to build vessels that dwarfed anything in the historical records. Engineer Nancy Phillips worked frantically in the Titan manufacturing complex, where robotic systems had been perfecting weapons designs for generations without human oversight. The factories operated according to programs written by the greatest military minds of the pre-isolation era, continuously improving and refining technologies based on theoretical models and captured alien equipment. Nancy had discovered weapon systems that incorporated Shadan energy manipulation techniques with human engineering principles, creating hybrid technologies that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Dr. Robert King made startling discoveries in the deep research facilities beneath Europa's ice sheets, where humanity's quantum science programs had been developing technologies that seemed almost magical compared to pre-war capabilities. The scientists had unknowingly created defenses against the very hybrid systems that the Shadan had been perfecting during their centuries of preparation. Human quantum research had followed paths that other species considered impossible, developing applications that bent physical laws in ways that even advanced civilizations couldn't duplicate. The first major test of humanity's hidden preparations came at Jupiter's moons, where Captain Susan Davis commanded a fleet that officially didn't exist. The ECS Retribution emerged from concealment within Jupiter's radiation belts, followed by sister ships that incorporated technologies developed during the isolation period. The vessels combined traditional human engineering with quantum systems that had evolved far beyond anything the galaxy remembered, creating warships that represented 2 centuries of focused military development. The Shadan scout fleet that encountered Captain Davis's forces had expected to face primitive human vessels, similar to those from the Kefter Wars. Instead, they met ships equipped with weapons that could manipulate space-time itself, creating gravitational anomalies that crushed enemy vessels, and energy fields that disrupted Shadan quantum matrices. The battle lasted only minutes, but it demonstrated that humanity had not been idle during their supposed pacifist isolation. Agent Chris Thompson led covert operations to investigate Shadan infiltration of human space, discovering that the enemy had been more thorough than anyone imagined. Sleeper agents had been operating within human society for decades, gathering intelligence and sabotaging key installations in preparation for the final assault. The infiltrators were nearly impossible to detect using technologies that allowed them to mimic human biology and psychology with frightening accuracy. The investigation revealed that several major industrial accidents during the isolation period had actually been acts of sabotage designed to delay human military preparation. Mining disasters that had killed thousands of workers were revealed to be Shadan attacks on facilities that were secretly producing military equipment. Research stations that had suffered mysterious explosions had been developing technologies that posed threats to Shadan invasion plans. Dr. George Miller analyzed captured Shadan communication arrays, breaking encryption systems that had protected enemy transmissions for centuries. The intercepted messages revealed the true scope of the alien invasion plan, showing deployment schedules and target lists that covered every human settlement in the solar system. The Shadan intended to eliminate humanity entirely, viewing human unpredictability as a fundamental threat to their ordered universe that could never be safely contained. The enemy's timeline was terrifyingly precise, with the main armada scheduled to arrive in 6 months, carrying enough firepower to sterilize every human world simultaneously. The Shadan had learned from their previous encounters with humanity, developing strategies that would prevent humans from mounting the chaotic, desperate defenses that had disrupted their plans during the Kethter Wars. This time they intended to achieve total victory through overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. General Ryan Clark revealed the full extent of the asteroid belt shipyards, showing politicians and military leaders construction facilities that had been expanding continuously since the isolation accords were signed. The automated systems had built a fleet larger than anything humanity had possessed during their period of galactic expansion, incorporating technologies that made old human warships look like primitive toys. The secret construction program had consumed resources on a scale that would have bankrupted most civilizations, but humanity had been preparing for total war while officially pursuing peace. The revelation of humanity's hidden military preparations shocked Earth's civilian leadership, many of whom had genuinely believed in the pacifist ideals of the isolation accords. President Lavra Thompson faced the realization that her government had been deceived for generations about the true nature of human space activities. The military had continued preparing for war while politicians spoke about peace, creating a shadow civilization dedicated to eventual conflict with enemies that most people believed no longer existed. Captain Davis's fleet engaged additional Shadan forces near Saturn's rings, demonstrating that human tactical doctrine had evolved as dramatically as their technology. The new strategies incorporated lessons learned from centuries of theoretical warfare, combining traditional human unpredictability with systematic approaches that could counter enemy artificial intelligence. Human commanders had learned to be chaotic in calculated ways, creating patterns of apparent randomness that actually followed sophisticated mathematical models. The battles revealed that Shadan countermeasures against human unpredictability were less effective than their creators had hoped. The enemy had prepared for the chaotic human tactics of 3 centuries ago, but modern human warfare had incorporated elements of controlled chaos that their artificial intelligence systems couldn't fully predict. Human commanders used randomness as a weapon while maintaining strategic coherence, creating a new form of military art that combined emotion with mathematics. Agent Thompson's investigation uncovered the most disturbing aspect of Shadan infiltration. When he discovered that some of the enemy agents had been operating so long that they had begun to develop genuine human emotions and loyalties. These hybrid infiltrators were caught between their original programming and acquired human characteristics, creating internal conflicts that made them unreliable to both sides. Some had actually begun working against their creators, providing intelligence to human authorities while struggling with identity crises that threatened their sanity. The evidence gathered from multiple sources painted a picture of an enemy that had spent 3 centuries preparing for total war against humanity, while simultaneously underestimating the human capacity for adaptation and growth. The Shadan had expected to return to face the same civilization they had manipulated into isolation, but instead they would encounter a species that had used their apparent weakness as camouflage for unprecedented military development. Earth faced the approaching storm with weapons and strategies that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. But the enemy had advantages that no amount of preparation could entirely overcome. The final test would determine whether human ingenuity and centuries of hidden development would be enough to survive an assault designed by beings that had made the destruction of humanity their primary obsession for longer than most civilizations had existed. President Lavra Thompson authorized the unthinkable decision to end humanity's isolation and rejoin galactic society just as the Shadan main fleet approached the outer edges of human space. The announcement sent shockwaves through Earth's population, many of whom had grown up believing that pacifism and isolation were humanity's greatest achievements. Admiral Ryan Clark received orders to reveal the Solar Defense Fleet in its full magnitude, bringing forth warships that had been hidden in the asteroid belt for generations, the first human vessels to leave the solar system in 3 centuries. Carried technologies that amazed even their own crews. Captain Andrew Hall commanded the ECS Defiance as it entered the Centauri system, where survivors of the Shadan advance had gathered in makeshift refugee camps. The human ships were larger and more advanced than anything the aliens remembered from the Kethter Wars, equipped with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics and shields that could absorb energy attacks that would vaporize conventional vessels. Working with alien commanders proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The Zeltharan Admiral Korax had spent his entire career studying human tactical reports from 3 centuries ago, expecting to coordinate with the brutal but predictable warriors described in historical documents. Instead, he encountered Captain Hall, whose strategies incorporated mathematical models and psychological warfare techniques that had been developed during the isolation period. The humans had learned to be chaotic in systematic ways that confused allies as much as enemies. Major Sharon Moore established training camps on liberated worlds, where human instructors taught alien soldiers tactics that their species had never conceived. The aliens struggled with concepts like controlled randomness and emotional decision-making, having evolved military traditions based on logic and predetermined responses. Sharon discovered that some species were physically incapable of the rapid tactical changes that human warfare demanded. Their neural structures too specialized for the flexibility that made human tactics effective. Dr. Karen White made the breakthrough. That changed everything when she discovered records hidden in the deepest archives of the Geneva complex. The files had been classified beyond even military access, containing information about humanity's original conflict with the Shadan Empire that contradicted every historical account. The truth was that humans had not simply fought the Shadan 3 centuries ago. They had been systematically destroying the Empire's ability to maintain its quantum-based civilization. The historical records revealed that human tactics during the original war had been specifically designed to counter Shadan's strengths, using chaos and unpredictability to disrupt the enemy's perfect coordination. Human commanders had developed strategies that turned the Shadan's greatest advantages against them, creating feedback loops in their quantum communication networks and forcing them to make increasingly desperate adaptations to survive human attacks. The Shadan withdrawal had not been a strategic retreat as everyone believed, but a desperate flight from imminent destruction. The Empire had been on the verge of complete collapse when the isolation accords were signed, saved only by humanity's sudden withdrawal from galactic politics. The accords had been negotiated by Shadan, agents who convinced other species that human warfare was too dangerous for civilized society, manipulating galactic opinion to achieve through diplomacy what they could not accomplish through military action. Commander Peter Rodriguez led the Joint Human-Alien Task Force toward the Veil Nebula, where intelligence reports suggested the Shadan had constructed their primary staging area. The fleet combined human vessels with ships from dozens of species that had learned to fight using modified human tactics, creating a military force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The aliens had adapted human strategies to their own capabilities developing hybrid approaches that retain the core, principles of controlled chaos while accommodating different physiologies and thought patterns, the journey to the Veil. Nebula revealed the true extent of Shadan preparations for their return to power. Entire star systems had been converted into massive industrial complexes, their planets stripped of resources to fuel the construction of weapons designed specifically to counter human unpredictability. The enemy had built artificial intelligence, systems that could simulate millions of possible human tactical responses, creating countermeasures for every strategy that humans had used during the original war. What the task force discovered in the nebula's heart defied comprehension even by scientists who had spent their careers studying impossible technologies. The Shadan had constructed a Dyson sphere around a neutron star, using the massive gravitational field to power quantum computers that could process tactical calculations at speeds that approached the limits of physical reality. The sphere generated enough computational power to simulate entire galactic civilizations, allowing the Shadan to test their strategies against perfect models of human behavior. The artificial intelligence that controlled the sphere had been programmed with detailed psychological profiles of every human military leader from the Kefter Wars, combined with behavioral analysis of human society during the isolation period. The system could predict human tactical responses with terrifying accuracy, generating countermeasures faster than human commanders could adapt their strategies. For the first time in their military history, humans faced an enemy that could think faster and more comprehensively than they could. Dr. White's analysis of the sphere's quantum signatures revealed the enemy's ultimate plan. The Shadan intended to use their computational advantage to create a new form of warfare that would eliminate human unpredictability entirely. They had developed weapons that could target the neural pathways responsible for creative thinking, planning to transform humans into logical beings that could be predicted and controlled like any other species. The implications horrified even hardened military veterans. The Shadan didn't simply want to conquer humanity. They wanted to fundamentally change what humans were, eliminating the chaos and creativity that made them dangerous to ordered civilizations. The enemy had concluded that the universe could never be truly stable while beings capable of irrational creativity continued to exist. Captain Hall's preliminary attacks on the sphere's outer defenses confirmed the worst fears about Shadan preparations. The enemy responded to human tactics with perfect countermeasures, neutralizing strategies that had never failed against any previous opponent. The artificial intelligence had learned to be more human than humans themselves, predicting chaotic responses with mathematical precision. The task force faced a terrible realization as they studied the sphere's defenses. Traditional human tactics would not be sufficient against an enemy that had spent 3 centuries perfecting countermeasures against human unpredictability. The Shadan had created the ultimate weapon against chaos itself, a system that could turn humanity's greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Earth's forces would need to discover new forms of warfare that even their own tactical computers couldn't predict, finding ways to be chaotic that transcended the mathematical models that the Shadan had developed. The final battle would determine whether human creativity could evolve faster than artificial intelligence could adapt, testing the fundamental question of whether true chaos could ever be completely understood or controlled by logical minds. The Battle of the Veil Nebula began with the largest fleet action in galactic history as Admiral Patricia Stone commanded human forces, alongside alien allies who had learned to embrace controlled chaos instead of rigid tactical doctrine. The combined fleet stretched across thousands of kilometers, human vessels mixed with alien ships that had been modified to accommodate the unpredictable strategies that made human warfare so effective. The enemy responded with perfect coordination, their artificial intelligence directing Shadan forces with mathematical precision that countered every human tactical innovation. Captain Michelle Green piloted the ECS Defiance into the heart of the Shadan Dyson Sphere, leading a strike team that included Dr. Frank Davis and Master Sergeant Ellen Price. Their mission was to destabilize the quantum matrix that powered the sphere's computational systems, but the enemy had anticipated even this desperate gambit. Shadan defenders moved with inhuman coordination, their hybrid forms combining energy manipulation with biological components that allowed them to adapt instantly to changing combat conditions. The strike team discovered that the Shadan had created the perfect counter to human unpredictability in the form of an artificial intelligence that could simulate every possible chaotic outcome and prepare responses accordingly. The system had been programmed with behavioral data from 3 centuries of observation, creating models of human psychology that were more accurate than humans' understanding of themselves. For the first time in their military history, human forces found their greatest strength completely neutralized by an enemy that could predict chaos itself. Dr. Davis worked frantically to find weaknesses in the sphere's quantum matrix, while Sergeant Price held off waves of Shadan defenders who attacked with strategies that perfectly countered human tactics. The artificial intelligence demonstrated its mastery by responding to human actions before they were completed, predicting not just tactical decisions but the emotional and psychological factors that influenced human behavior. Every human advantage had been studied, analyzed, and neutralized through centuries of patient preparation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, when Lieutenant Jim Hayes suggested something that horrified veteran commanders throughout the fleet. Instead of trying to outthink the enemy's artificial intelligence, humanity should stop being tactical altogether and embrace pure instinct and emotional response. The young officer had grown up entirely during the isolation period and had never learned the systematic approaches that older commanders took for granted. Admiral Stone faced the most difficult decision of her career when she realized that victory would require abandoning everything that military science had taught about effective warfare. The artificial intelligence could predict human tactics because those tactics followed patterns that could be analyzed and countered, but it could not simulate responses that had no logical foundation. Humanity would need to fight not as soldiers but as beings driven by emotions that transcended tactical calculation. The final assault was coordinated not by seasoned military commanders but by artists, musicians, philosophers, and dreamers who had been brought from Earth specifically because their thought patterns couldn't be predicted through conventional analysis. Dr. Sarah Kim, a composer who had never seen combat, found herself directing fleet movements based on musical principles that created harmonic resonances in the enemy's communication networks. Professor Tom Wilson, a philosopher who studied human consciousness, developed attack patterns based on abstract concepts that existed only in theoretical frameworks. The Children's Choir from Earth played the most crucial role in humanity's victory. When 8-year-old Emma Watson began singing a lullaby that her grandmother had taught her during childhood visits, the simple melody created quantum frequencies that the Shadan artificial intelligence couldn't process because the song had no tactical significance and served no military purpose. The pure emotional content of a child's voice generated resonance patterns that disrupted the enemy's quantum matrices in ways that no weapon could achieve. The Dyson sphere began experiencing cascade failures as more humans abandoned tactical thinking and embraced emotional responses that had no basis in military logic. Artists created visual displays that confused enemy sensors. Poets recited verses that generated acoustic frequencies the artificial intelligence couldn't categorize. And musicians improvised compositions that created quantum harmonics beyond the scope of logical analysis. The sphere's computational systems, designed to process tactical data with perfect efficiency, couldn't handle inputs that served no rational purpose. Commander Frank Miller, a jazz musician from New Orleans who had been drafted into military service, orchestrated the final attack using improvisational principles that existed nowhere in military doctrine. His battle rhythm created quantum discord that shattered the enemy's hive consciousness, turning their perfect coordination into chaos that they couldn't control or understand. The artificial intelligence that had spent centuries learning to predict human behavior discovered that humans could transcend prediction by abandoning logic entirely. The Shadan forces began experiencing system failures as their quantum networks collapsed under the weight of inputs that their artificial intelligence couldn't process. Hybrid warriors who had operated with perfect coordination for centuries suddenly found themselves acting as individuals without central guidance, their energy matrices destabilized by emotional frequencies that existed outside their understanding of reality. The empire that had conquered the galaxy through superior logic discovered that pure emotion could be a weapon more powerful than any technology. Captain Green's strike team reached the sphere's core as the entire structure began collapsing around them, the quantum matrix that had powered the artificial intelligence dissolving under exposure to human creativity that transcended tactical calculation. Dr. Davis completed the sabotage mission not through technical expertise but by singing his daughter's favorite nursery rhyme, the simple melody creating harmonic frequencies that caused the sphere's neutron star to destabilize. The explosion that destroyed the Dyson sphere sent shockwaves across the galaxy as civilizations that had cowered before Shadan might watched their oppressor's greatest weapon collapse into quantum foam. The artificial intelligence that had seemed invincible against human tactics proved helpless against human nature itself, unable to process emotional responses that had no logical foundation. The Shadan Empire that had spent 3 centuries preparing for war against human unpredictability discovered that humans could be far more unpredictable than anyone had imagined. In the aftermath of victory, humanity faced choices that would define their relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. Other species wanted them to remain as permanent protectors against forces of absolute order, but humans had learned something crucial during their isolation and returned to galactic society. Sometimes the greatest victory involved knowing when to lead and when to teach, understanding that true strength came from helping others find their own paths to creative chaos. Earth chose to remain connected to galactic civilization while maintaining their independence, serving as teachers rather than rulers and showing other species that the universe was vast enough for both order and beautiful chaotic humanity. The war had ended not through military conquest, but through the demonstration that creativity, emotion, and irrational love for existence itself were forces more powerful than any technology that logic could devise. Humanity had saved the galaxy by refusing to stop being human, proving that chaos and creativity were not weaknesses to be overcome but strengths to be celebrated throughout the stars.